You are boarding a train through destiny to the avenue of fate. Today's ride has you wandering off the beaten path to encounter perhaps the most dangerous animal of them all. Prepare your throwing arm for the Fright train. I'm Malik,
I'm Drogan.
and welcome to the Fright train.
We're discussing the works of H.P. Lovecraft,
From the very first, when he was 15,
to the ones that were ghostwritten by K.A. Applegate.
H.P. Lovecraft. Why are we talking about him?
Well, he's a pretty popular figure, and I think you'd agree. He's got a lot of books, a lot of people like to talk about him, although not many people have actually read his works.
Not enough, I'd say, because
Sure.
I really think there is a lot there to him, and I do think I wouldn't even necessarily call him popular, because he's always seemed kind of popular on the fringes still, even though it is kind of played out a bit. It always seems like the works that are most popular relating to him are works that are like derivative or in some way homage his actual writing.
I've heard a lot of people reference like Cthulhu, but most of them have probably not read any story with that character in them, I would say. I haven't even read him. I reference Cthulhu all the time, but I really have not read any original source on this guy.
It's the perfect, weird, giant, tentacle-faced monster. He's great in every way. Spooky, distant, contacts you through dreams.
I have a statue of Cthulhu on my desk.
And you have
that
yet
I
to read Call of Cthulhu.
3D printed. I have not read Call of Cthulhu.
Well, hopefully, we'll get to it. But first, we've got to read through a load of other stories.
Oh, yes.
Starting with The Beast in the Cave.
The Beast in the Cave starts out with our unnamed protagonist realizing he's lost, but he does not freak out.
In a rather dramatic fashion, too. I think one thing that's really fun to point out in Lovecraft's stories in general is the writing style and how verbose it can get. And I really like this opening phrase. The horrible conclusion which had been gradually obtruding itself upon my confused and reluctant mind was now an awful certainty. I was lost, completely, hopelessly lost, in the vast and labyrinthine recesses of the Mammoth Cave.
Yeah, there's a little bit of redundant word usage there. I actually had to look up obtruding because I didn't know what it meant. And apparently it is become noticeable in an unwelcome or intrusive way, which is essentially what the whole rest of that sentence is trying to describe, just kind of in the one word somewhere in the middle of it.
He does seem to retread a lot of ground in general.
Yeah. If I didn't already know better, I'd say it sounds a lot like when I used to write essays in high school,
Yeah.
and I needed word count, so I would just start throwing in random big words just to get the page to fill up more.
So I think like the core aim, like what he's really going for, is he wants to describe a feeling or a sensation with laser accuracy, and he's willing to employ as many words as possible to get there. But since he's 15, he's really bad at it at the moment.
True.
Compared to, like, for an average 15-year-old, this is really solid work. I want to put that out there now.
Oh, no. There's definitely a moment later on where I was kind of creeped out the first once or twice that I read it.
Yeah, compared to his future works, I would say this was fairly mediocre, especially by the end. But it's still a learning experience.
Yep. Yeah, we'll have to make a scale of scary stories.
Which
I think we
one's
talked
the
about
scariest? Which one's the...
Which
I think
one's
we
the
did, yeah.
scariest? Yeah, we can rank them in terms of scariness.
Well, this one's currently number 1
It
by
is.
default.
It is right now the best one we've read. So, I had a bit right here just after the introduction. That never more should I behold the blessed light of day, or scan the pleasant hills and dales of the beautiful world outside. My reason could no longer entertain the slightest unbelief. it's kind of it took me a minute to realize that he was just saying that I could no longer like trick myself into thinking I'd see the outside world
It's like,
again.
I'm gonna die down here.
Yeah.
I can't lie to myself anymore.
He's got a really like long double negative. Like it's such a verbose double negative. I didn't realize it was a double negative at first and was confused.
That nevermore should I behold the blessed light of day is a solid start to a sentence, though.
It is.
I really like that particular one.
And it ends so poorly. My reason could no longer entertain the slightest unbelief.
That's just a perfect juxtaposition. The sentence starts off just really strong and then kind of peters out. It's almost a microcosm for the story as a whole.
Yeah, that's a good observation. So we carry on, and the protagonist, and possibly the writer, is rather proud of himself that he doesn't panic as soon as he realizes he can't find his way out.
Yep, he's deriving no small pleasure from the fact that he is unprovoked. He is staying calm, cool, and collected in this terrible circumstance entirely of his own devising, because it follows up shortly after that. He intentionally wandered off the path away from the tour guide that he was following through this cave. Now, you have gone caving.
I
yes?
have, yes.
Would you say it is a remotely intelligent thing to wander off away from the tour guide in a cave that is not entirely explored?
And not in the slightest. It depends. It depends on the cave. Some caves have a really nice like path, but I doubt at this time, in especially Mammoth Cave, that they had any such paths. I did do a sort of throwback tour, I suppose you could say, where it sort of simulated how these kind of turn of the century people would explore a cave. And so we had little oil lamps, like with actual little flames and all in them, and that was our only source of light, and that was how we toured the cave. It was very spooky. It would have made it a little bit more difficult to kind of keep your bearings, because you could only see the rocks that were like within like 10 feet of you very well.
With the lantern light.
Yeah, he's definitely a bit of an idiot for wandering off, and he admits as much.
It definitely reduces the amount of sympathy I have for the protagonist, because he's cocky about being okay with the fact that he's wandered off and gotten himself like lost in this labyrinthian realm of devious passages.
I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it is a kind of a cool way of introducing a character. Like he exposits a lot about how he's not panicking in the face of this kind of, threat to his life. But he just kind of glosses over the fact that, it was kind of, it was kind of my fault, but I didn't panic or anything, just in case you're wondering.
I'd actually agree with that. This is definitely an entertaining protagonist, just not a very sympathy-invoking one.
So this is where I ran across one of my first kind of fun words, and I think this is going to be a kind of a thing with Lovecraft. He has a huge vocabulary, and there's going to be a lot of really neat little words that I haven't seen before. So he's describing a colony of consumptives who are living in the cave trying to heal themselves. He describes the air as salubrious, which is apparently kind of a medically helpful attribute to ascribe to something.
So it's giving him like a renewed energy.
Like, that old saying where people say, oh, get out and get some fresh air, it'll be good for you. So these people had sort of the opposite opinion. It was go into a cave and get some cave air, it'll be good for you.
Yeah, it's untouched, raw earth air. It's obscure, hard to find, occult even. You don't know where it's coming from. It's good for you.
Or not, as the case may be. Apparently it drove the consumptives mad. And we never quite know what happens to them, which makes them at least more of some, maybe perhaps the creepier of the monsters in this story. So his torch starts to run out. He very practically decides to make absolutely sure he's lost before sort of settling in to starve to death.
At least he's honest about his situation.
So he calls out, thinking maybe someone will see him, or hear him, rather. And just as he gives up shouting for help, he hears some footsteps.
He gets attention, but not the kind he's after.
And there was a very interesting little bit here where he specifically was listening to the footsteps approaching, and he realizes that they're not the tour guide, because it's not the sound of, like, boots on stone.
Yeah, he describes it, and I really do rather like this description the first time through, that it sounds like it's, like, kind of running on 4 legs, and then running on 2, and then running on 4 again. My problem is that he describes it 3 additional separate times, that the creature happens to have this particular, like, odd, like, strange sounding gait.
Another kind of weird sort of dichotomy of word usage. He says, now sharpened in even greater degree by the complete silence of the cave, bore to my benumbed understanding the unexpected and dreadful knowledge that these footfalls were not like those of any mortal man. So yeah, his senses are sharpened, but his mind is benumbed, all in the same sentence.
I can kind of see that, though. I can kind of see he's not really thinking. He's like sort of lapsing into more of a prey-like mindset, just focusing entirely on sensory information, no longer putting serious thought behind his reactions or words. He's sort of almost being like consumed by kind of a natural response to, there is a mysterious predator out there lurking for me. There's nothing really to think about beyond that, because that's a threat. You basically just have to like focus on your surroundings and how to escape it. That's all that's worth like really intellectually approaching.
He says here, my mind conceived of no intent on the part of the visitor save that of hostility. So yeah, he was definitely in this is danger mode. So he kind of shuts up and gets quiet, kind of sees if maybe it'll pass him by.
I like this particular line. Yet the instinct of self-preservation, never wholly dormant, was stirred in my breast. And though escape from the oncoming peril might but spare me for a sterner and more lingering end, I determined nevertheless to part with my life at as high a price as I could command.
This is a very noble attitude, I'd say.
I definitely like that idea of him sort of being really cocky about his surroundings and like really sort of accepting of his death, but then the moment, like the way he's going to die seems to change and become like more immediate and less distant, is the moment he starts like really sort of fighting for his life. He seemed to, before this, sort of resigned himself to his death.
He was almost happy in a way. He was describing it in such like, idyllic phrases. What a way to go, starving to death in this grand sepulcher. Surely no one else would have such a fantastic place. But then he's about to get eaten, or he thinks he's about to get eaten, and he's suddenly like, we gotta stop this.
This is not how I die.
I may get eaten, but it is not this day. Yeah.
I don't want to get eaten. I want to starve to death from not eating.
And now in classic, what I really hope becomes classic Lovecraft fashion, he likes the details. So even amidst the impending danger, his impending doom, our protagonist can't help but wonder at what this animal eats. And so he starts kind of in the back of his mind, I suppose, in the few seconds he has before this creature gets to him, is he's thinking, well, he probably eats, like, the blind fish and stuff that end up in the cave.
Eyeless fish, bats, and rats. All of these 3 animals have no eyes in this particular cave because they are attuned to their environment. This is maybe getting ahead of ourselves, but in The Mountains of Madness, one of his more famous stories, and I believe the one Guillermo del Toro wants to do an adaptation of, there are prominently featured in these really nice cave descriptions that are actually, I think, kind of reminiscent of this particular story. There are these tall, like 6 foot, 7 foot tall eyeless penguins that have also evolved and adapted to this like just sun-free environment. So it seems to be a thing that creatures that have evolved in an alien environment just further add to just how distanced this setting is from normal day-to-day life.
So you liked the fish, bats, and rats. In the very next sentence, he's talking about how like the fish end up in the cave. Oh, the ordinary fish, yeah. So there's like, there's 2 pieces here. So another word I had to look up. He uses the word freshet, which is the flood of a river from heavy rain or melted snow. So ordinary fish get wafted in by this freshet of a nearby river. He doesn't know how, so he says this river communicates in some occult manner with the waters of the cave. So somehow the fish, whenever the river floods, get sort of teleported into the cave by some strange means.
They don't know how the fish are getting in. They just know that rainwater is causing rivers to somehow flood into here. And it's feeding these beasts, or maybe this one lone beast, fish, ordinary fish, to go along with the blind fish.
And, if the beast is feeling particularly peckish, he's got a couple sides of bats and rats to choose from.
And perhaps the occasional person who wanders off from his group.
So he now starts to think about, what does this beast look like? This beast is probably similarly grotesque to your blind penguins you were just describing. So it's, he's having all these horrible visions of this thing.
I do really like this, because this is an idea that I think gets brought up in a lot of his future stories and just becomes a staple of his, describing the unseen or unseeable.
Yeah, and in this case, the literally unseeable.
Yeah, it's like trying to fill in gaps that can't possibly be filled in.
Yeah.
And so the imagination of the characters themselves even just runs wild, and we get to kind of go along with that particular nightmare ride.
Yeah, this was the bit that really got me because yeah, like you say, it kind of pulls you along. Like, the description is so dry that your own brain can't help but also try to think of what it would look like.
You really have to visualize it. You're kind of coerced into doing it.
I think what really spoke to me, especially having been in a cave and turned all the lights out and seen just how dark it is, like how much there is no light. In this line he says, "Then I remembered with a start that even should I succeed in felling my antagonist, I should never behold its form, as my torch had long since been extinct, and I was entirely unprovided with matches. The tension on my brain became frightful." Yeah, I can definitely see that, not knowing.
That was the kind of feeling that you got from that sort of oppressive, dark atmosphere.
and he describes it in this story, and I definitely would have described it in a very similar way. Like, when you turn all the lights out in a cave, you just saw, let's say it was like a big chamber. If you just saw that there's a wide space around you and that there's a few people, but you're all kind of spaced out on the floor, sitting down for your own safety or whatever. You turn all the lights out. And for the first few seconds, it's like, ooh, this is cool. And then it is like a physical sort of presence, the darkness. Because, you'll hold your hand up and you can touch your nose with your hand and you cannot see anything. You can wave it right in front of your eyes. And just the strange, sort of kind of non-shapes, I guess. If you were to squeeze your eyes really tight, you see a little bit of that, kind of those little odd colors created by the blood vessels or whatever. It's like that, but right up next to your face. And it feels like there's a physical thing wrapped around your head. It's crazy.
I think that really speaks to one of his strengths, because in the little opening blurb of the copy of his stories I have, it actually mentions that he himself, H.P. Lovecraft, did not step foot in a cave. He got all of this just from reading first-hand accounts and research about Mammoth Cave. So this is purely through research he's managed to describe something in enough detail to invoke these actual first-hand experiences you had, in a way. So I think that's really impressive.
Yeah, he does a good job describing it. I would say, however, that sensation of it being physical, a physical presence kind of wrapped around your head, that's pretty universal. Almost anybody who goes in and turns all the lights out in a cave, and especially if everybody is real quiet, so that you can't even hear any sounds of footsteps or anything. That quiet and the darkness is pretty much anybody feels that sort of oppressiveness.
Just seeps into the soul.
So whenever I read that line, oppressive darkness, it I understand what that means, because that's it. It's something where it's I wouldn't have really known it until I went out and saw it, and would definitely recommend. Kind of sidetracked here, but definitely recommend, if anybody gets the opportunity to go on a little cave tour, definitely go do it. It's a lot of fun.
I definitely want to go at some point now. Maybe not to Mammoth Cave.
It's well worth it, and especially if we I know like 50, probably more than 50% of Lovecraft takes place underground. There's going to be a lot of this. It'll really help to understand what he's kind of talking about.
I'm actually kind of curious, because I know this was written when he was 15. I'm kind of curious down the line, and I'll probably do some research on this after this podcast, whether or not he like did get around to going caving himself, because it is such a common topic, and in his stories, I'd be interested to see at what point did he go, and then to compare maybe the stories like before that and after that, whether there was like a jump in quality once he had firsthand experience, if he ever had firsthand experience.
That would be interesting. I don't know, because it's something like cave tours is something that didn't really get popular until, I want to say, after the Great Depression. And this is going to be kind of weird cave trivia. But part of the New Deal and the sort of public works projects that came from it was building all of the concrete walkways and kind of hollowing out some of the more tight passages in a lot of the really famous caves.
To kind of like improve the quality of national parks?
Yeah, so that they're easier to access for everybody to come and kind of look at the underground wonders. And so I don't remember when I did this, but on a big road trip, I went and toured 3 or 4 different caves. And they all had these really kind of old concrete passages, or walkways, I guess, that had been installed in like the 20s. If he lived that long, he may have gone down and seen some of these caves firsthand.
And I mean, even before the New Deal, he might have, because this was, I believe, 1905 was when this was written. Yeah, 1905, April 21st.
Yeah, so he would have been well into adulthood before kind of cave tours became more popular. Well, not so much more popular, but more accessible, I guess. Because in 1905, travel would have been pretty difficult. I mean, I had to drive 2 whole days just to get into an area that had enough cave activity for then to spend the next 2 days.
I mean, assuming he's getting first-hand accounts, I'd assume then that there were these sorts of guided tours out there. They just weren't as prominent.
So cave exploration was incredibly popular, but also very dangerous. They only had very rudimentary tools. Like I say, the reenactment tour, I guess, with the oil lamps and no walkways. So we used like little rickety wooden ladders and these burning lamps, and the tour guide was dressed in period clothing. It was a little more challenging than a standard tour, but definitely like a lot more...
Kind of gets you into that mindset.
Yeah.
And did you ever feel compelled to wander off, though?
No. Well, okay. Perhaps I'm a better student of philosophy and
oh my God.
know better.
To confer. Let those who are more experienced with what it is you're doing guide you.
Perhaps. Or I just don't want to get lost in a cave like a dumbass.
But a lucky dumbass.
True. Well, this guy's maybe not so lucky. He's getting snuck up on by a creature as we speak.
Yeah.
So he picks up a rock and prepares to throw it at whatever's coming towards him.
He's just standing still, hearing the footfalls that are, again, described, I believe, as first 4-footed, then 2-footed, then 4-footed again.
Really kind of hammering that home.
Beast rounds the corner. He chucks the rock at it. Beast dodges out of the way. He chucks another rock at it. Connects.
Bam.
Right to the head. The beast drops.
Out cold.
One hit.
First round. Crowd's going crazy.
Hit. He knocks the monster out.
Goes down for the 10 count.
I like this story. I don't want to rag on it too much. But talk about a way to like just suck the air out of a potential horror, to literally just kill it in such a simple fashion.
Well, it's not quite dead yet.
Yeah, it is still alive. It's like gasping for breath.
Yeah, it makes a noise, and he realizes it's still alive, but maybe not in too good a shape, at which point the character, I believe, screams like a little girl and runs away. And he's immediately found by the guide, because, the guide realized he was missing when his little tour party exited the cave and was like, well, he's probably in there somewhere, dicking around, being a dumbass. And so the guide comes back and looks for him. And so at this point, with all the screaming and the running, the guide, hears him and comes find him.
And then we get the second best reveal of this particular story.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that he was only gone for 4 hours.
Yep.
He got lost by wandering off from the group, consigned himself to death, freaked out, attacked and successfully subdued an unknown animal in the span of 4 hours, and he is found at last.
And he's a gibbering mess. He cannot contain himself. So he went from cool, collected, I'm a student of philosophy. I will not go, screaming to the grave, to 4 hours later. Well, maybe not even 4, because he probably wandered for a while. So, in the span of 2 hours, perhaps, from realization to being found, he goes from cool and collected to just reduced to nothing. And I think that's going to be a theme for most of Lovecraft. I feel like a lot of his characters eventually end up kind of a slobbering mess.
It's a fun state to end up in.
Yeah, the guide is like, whoa, this guy's not well. The story comes out that he threw a rock at a thing.
Now that I'm looking at this section again, this part is actually rather short because he encounters the tour guide, and then in 2 sentences they've already retraced their steps. I think because he wanted to immediately get back into focusing on the beast, which this is one of the words I highlighted because I particularly enjoy it and its non-traditional use. Cautiously advancing, we gave vent to a simultaneous ejaculation of wonderment. For of all the unnatural monsters either of us had in our lifetime beheld, this was in a surpassing degree the strangest. Ejaculation. Not a traditional word to describe someone or 2 people yelling at the sight of something.
Well, maybe at the time.
I do think at the time, because there was a story, I forget which particular story it was, by Edgar Allan Poe that also used the term ejaculation to describe someone shouting. So this was definitely, and H.P. Lovecraft took a lot of inspiration from Poe, so this is definitely a word of the era. Maybe not Lovecraft's era, because I believe he tended to write even a little more old-fashioned for the particular time he was writing. But yeah, this in and around that time, ejaculation was used to describe loud shouting, which I think we should start bringing back.
Sure. Although it is a little bit funnier to read this as they come around the corner and they're so shocked by what they see that they just both jizz in their pants.
They immediately climax at the sight of a dead animal.
They see
or
this
dying
dead
animal.
and they're both just like, oh.
Ah! What a mess.
So they've soiled themselves. Or I'm sorry, they don't soil themselves. And
they don't soil themselves. They just shout.
Yeah, and this is the bit I actually somewhat disagree with from a story standpoint. Because they find the creature, and it is apparently, they reckon it's some form of, pale ape that, perhaps got lost from a circus or something inside the cave. And the reveal sort of takes some of the mystique away from...
the reveal is...
From the story.
Are you talking about the reveal? The reveal of the novel? The biggest twist?
Oh, not quite the reveal. I was actually...
Just the visual.
Sloping into disappointment at the fact that they even found the creature at all. Because that...
Yeah. I would have preferred I think you were mentioning this in our previous attempt at recording this podcast. Please don't try to track that down, whoever you are. Them finding it and it just not being there, Halloween style, would have been far more satisfying than what we ended up getting.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from his later stories of ghosts and monsters probably greatly influenced the way we view ghost stories now. So this is still in an age before that kind of thematic element of mystery was really commonplace. And so, because we're going to see this happen in a few of the other stories that we'll be reading in the next few podcasts, he builds up, and he's got a really great middle of the story and a really great monster that, the protagonist is facing, and then at the very end it gets revealed, and it's kind of spoiled.
He is best when it is steeped in mystery, when these things are unknown, and I think that's true for horror in general. And I want to say he ends up learning this particular lesson pretty well towards like the end of his career.
I'd have to look it up, but as I understand it, he's sort of invented
that just like complete unknowable sort of deal. I think like maybe to an extent this can be seen as like him going back and kind of noticing this himself, noticing his own sort of taking the steam out of it, because I mean you can't read the last sentence of this story and still take it seriously because it's so wonderfully do I get the honors? Do I get the honors of reading this? Oh my god, yes.
You're ejaculating.
I'm ejaculating this statement. The creature I had killed, the strange beast of the unfathomed cave was, or had at one time been, a man. And man, this sentence, it ends with 3 exclamation points, all capital letter man. It is the goofiest ending to a horror. It reads like a parody. This is something someone today would write as a joke. I want to like this story, but this particular ending just sucks the energy that it has out of it.
Well, and especially since this kind of goofy last sentence comes on the tail of about 2 or 3 paragraphs describing in great detail the creature, which the protagonist and his guide have not realized what it is. But the description is so long-winded that, we readers can't help but realize what it is long before it's actually revealed. Yeah, maybe back in the day he didn't think people would get it unless he came right out and said it, but he wanted his long kind of hinty description anyway. But
that's definitely something that comes up in the next story too. Just making sure that people know what it is.
To an even greater extent, I'd say. Like, I'd say the next story loops all the way back around from being kind of a disappointment to being the best reveal.
Almost. It's that one definitely comes across as so bad it's good type ending. But this one though, man! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! Exclamation point! A beautiful capstone to a 15-year-old writer getting into what would become his birthright as just this master of horror. I find this entire podcast and this entire particular story to be, like, if nothing else, this is where the greats start out. There's talent in here. You can see skill and artfulness in this story. Like, a lot of the descriptions are really good, but it is not a good story.
Yeah, no, it has the makings of a good story, but it also has a lot of elements of bad storytelling. So we've pretty well covered all of The Beast in the Cave. Promising beginnings to triumphant, exciting 3 exclamation point worthy endings.
Oh, yeah. So glad I got to read that one.
What do you think? Shall we rate this story on a scale, or shall we scale it against future works?
I'm going to go ahead and put this down as my benchmark for a 2 out of 10. Only in relation to H.P. Lovecraft stories. I do like rating things based off of things that they can be directly compared to. Based on other Lovecraft stories I've read, I'm going to put this down as a 2 out of 10, which I think is actually 1 point lower than I scored it the last time on the previous podcast, which I implore you, please, for the love of God, do not look that up. Do not try and find that in any way.
You don't want to listen to that.
This is much better.
Nonsense.
All right. So what would you rate?
I'd say I'd probably agree with 2 out of 10 because we need a baseline, and I know that it.
We need a flat line.
Well, it's been hyped up to me that his future works are really good. So if I'm gonna get on that hype train,
yeah, you gotta start with low expectations.
I'm gonna go ahead and say 2 out of 10 is probably fair. Maybe 3 out of 10, just kind of acknowledging the fact that he was really young.
Legitimately impressive for a 15-year-old. I think maybe the education system was a little more geared towards this level of verbiage, but
I don't know. I want to say I remember reading he was homeschooled. I don't know, though.
I think he was probably still above average for the time, but at the same time, I think, like, If you look at those really handy and depressing charts of presidential speeches by reading level and how the graph is just like a downward slope all the way to now where it's at like a 4th grade reading level for like the last like
Ooh.
4 or 5 presidents. I do think like in that time period, the vernacular was like a cut above the modern era.
All right. Now, as a second sort of running scale, we would like to keep track of the baddest Lovecraft monster.
Oh, man. So this is number 1 at the moment.
This is number 1, so there's nothing to compare to. Not going to go with a scale on these monsters. We're just going to kind of rank them compared to other monsters. So for right now, the beast, the man-beast, is number 1.
Did you want to rate the tour guide? Because I've noticed on, like, a little after he's mentioned, it does say his name is Charles. Thank you for listening to The Fright Train. This is our first proper episode, so we're still new to this whole podcast deal. If you have any comments or critiques, they would be most welcome. And if you thought it was good enough, we'd love if you shared it with your friends. We're approaching a post-advertising world, so the only way we'll catch on is if you help spread the word. We look forward to producing many more of these, so all aboard the Fright Train.